Do you know what salary you have to make as an individual in the United States to be considered a 1% earner?
I was at like 200K.
You're a little off. So
By a
I first
lot.
I first heard about it through a Gary Vaynerchuk video that he had where he just discusses to people about like how lucky you are and things like that, and why do people always try to be millionaires when to be 1% you just have to make air quote $440,000 a year. At the time I never fact checked it, but it was a moment that caused me to at least reflect what 1% actually looked like. And it wasn't Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, things like that. Those people are at the 1% of the 1% kind of level with their wealth. The actual number, when I checked the IRS's website, in 2019, your adjusted income would need to be 540 to be in the 1%. Either way, you don't have to be a millionaire or a multimillionaire or a billionaire to be at that level.
Is this for yearly income, or is this a
yearly?
Is that number okay?
Yearly individual income of 540,000.
Yep. No, I'm not.
But where that came from, where I had the discussion with my family, was when I was AS president of San Jose State University. We had talked about how the middle class doesn't actually exist, and it's a political tool that's used to address the majority without offending anyone. Think about it. What would you say you grew up like? In what social economic area?
I would say lower middle class. You know, we won't fall off where we're like struggling, but it wasn't the greatest. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't luxurious. Best way I could explain it.
So what differentiates you from being in the middle class then, or the upper middle class?
Well, as a kid, just would be more disposable income, whatever that meant. At first I really thought I was at quote unquote upper middle class from all the vacations we took and everything else. And as I pierced like the veil of my family's finances, we were check to check, in debt, going to these vacations, and that's when now I would say we would like more lower class just because of optic wise, but perception I would say upper middle class when I was a kid.
So perception, upper middle class, you would consider yourself to be lower middle class. What would you consider your family being poor?
No.
How would you define that?
How define the definition of poor?
Yeah.
I would say be worse off than paycheck to paycheck. I would say paycheck to paycheck, but you can't even do anything with that. Paycheck to paycheck, I would say lower middle class, only because you can still function and still be okay and breaking zero, versus poor, you're always struggling in negatives.
Got it. So let me repeat this back. So poor, you're operating in a negative. Lower middle class, you're paycheck to paycheck. Middle class, you have some disposable income. Upper middle class, you have more disposable income. And then what would rich be?
Just abundance of fuck you money.
Okay, so you have a fuck you fund.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So me making $200,000 a year, but because I have a lot of expenses and I play around a lot, I am paycheck to paycheck. So I'm lower middle class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really? You would still consider that lower middle class, even making $200K a year?
Well, if you think about it, rich dad, poor dad, you can make so many X money, but you're still operating at a zero.
Okay, so you would consider me lower middle class with that scenario that I talked about.
With that
but what would society think of me?
Society would say you're upper class, 100%. Society would say you'll be up there. Even for me, I'd be like, oh, you're not knowing your background. I would say, yeah, you're fucking you could afford it. I always joke about that. But yeah, I would say that, but not knowing the backgrounds of things, optically just being super surface level. Oh, you're making 200K, yeah, you're up there. And like higher middle class or upper class.
So you know how like we just went through all those kind of definitions and how they're very subjective to the way that you look at different things. But did you also notice when I brought up poor, you hesitated and actually had a little bit of more of an emotional reaction to it? than when you were
Tad.
defining middle class?
Yeah, because I feel poor right now. I'm like, damn, you struck a chord right there.
So the reason why when we were so where this came from, right? The AS presidents of the CSU system, we always met up every month. We did a lot of lobbying up in, California, up in Sacramento at the Capitol, or, with other different policies that we had to deal with. And that's where it brought up this conversation about, does the middle class actually exist, or is it just a political tool? And we were thinking it's more of a political tool, because if you remove the middle class, then the only way that you can address large groups is either the rich or the poor. And calling anyone poor causes an emotional reaction.
Yeah, it has that automatically I'm above you, like, stigma.
Someone's above you, right? Or no politician, even if there's a line in the sand that you can actually define as like, you are poor, the fact that someone's being like, the poor in California need these things in order to survive, versus the middle class in California needs these services to survive.
It makes the blow a little softer.
It makes it a little bit softer, but it also like hides like maybe what it actually means, because now you have, like, by introducing middle class, you have all of these shades of what the middle class is, from like, I'm like, bottom tier, lower middle class. I'm like higher tier, lower middle class, but I wouldn't say I'm actually middle class yet. Oh, I'm kind of middle class. Right?
There's no really definition of said with that. When I was starting to go on my financial journey of really going into it, it was your cash flow of what defined your kind of poor, middle class, upper class type of status in my head. Not because of, I always understanding just basic finances, personal finances, was that if they're poor, what's their negative, what's their balance sheet, middle class, upper class, then just seeing a number saying, oh yeah, you're definitely upper class. So I think that makes it different for me and you. It's because we're both in that world. So if you're not in it, people just say, oh, you're making X, you got to be up there.
It also comes, have you heard of what a Henry is?
No.
High earner, not rich yet. So it's a term that's coined for individuals that make high incomes, but they have no, I mean, in a way, they like blame society for the cost of living, but realistically, they have no control over their expenses. And so their expenses match their high incomes. And so they're, for the most part, not saving or anything.
It's the basic psychology of money. Oh, if you hear, there was a small little thing about on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the movie with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. There was like a small little house party with other neighbors, and they said, oh my God, my husband just got a raise. Now we can afford to get the stuff and get the kitchen renovated or something like that, And why you got to increase something when you don't need to? I don't know. It's just that's a small tangent.
So where all the reason why I kind of walked you through all those little blends is having a conversation with individuals. One, money is sensitive. But two, if you have the conversation and you strip away the ability to address anything as the middle class, it becomes very emotional all of a sudden.
And very heated.
Super heated. Because then you're like, well, what's the line of rich? And you're like, well, I think majority of people could say if you're in the 1%, you're rich. So then that would be, in 2019, that's 540,000. In 2020, the IRS hasn't published more recent data yet, but the number is anywhere between like closer to 600K to 800K, depending on what kind of survey you're looking at. So let's say we draw the line in the sand at 600K. So if you're above 600K a year as an individual, as an individual making 600K a year, you're rich. Anything below that, you're poor. Which, hey, you know what? I'm poor. It is what it is if it's by that definition, but it puts people a little bit on their heels a little bit when you start to talk about it like in those terms. But one thing I do think that it modifies is, if you're saying you're in middle class, it almost makes you feel like you're on track and you're okay. So you can also be a little bit more ignorant or neglect having to look at the line by line item. But if you're being told you're poor, money becomes a little bit more pressing, where you're going to take a little bit more look at it.
Mm-hmm. Even more monitored, or even just more motivated to do something. It can go either way.
It could go either way. Or if you're older, it hurts a lot more, because you're like, I've been doing this stuff for 40 years and I'm still what you're considering poor, right? See the emotionalness that comes with that? I don't know.
Pretty bad.
Yeah,
So
it's
so
triggering.
how did it hit your family? Like how did that conversation hit fam?
Oh, it was like a rude awakening of me being like, yo, you're still poor. No, we're still good. It's no, like I don't care about what you own. I care about the cash flow. I care about what you're investing in. I care about the assets. I mean, that's why you can see sometimes people that are like, you see those stories. Of course, stories are always cherry picked, but the teacher that makes 60K a year that's a millionaire.
It's like the
They
wealthy
were
barber of the book. Like just you just got to be smart in how where things invest and where it's yeah, it's one of those weird things. So I
ruthlessly
digress.
invest, save, build an asset that grows versus spending everything that you have or when you make it.